Welcome to the Blueprint Sessions. I'm Catherine Skinner. And I want to start off by saying that most people will tell you that if you're exhausted, it's because you need to do things like manage your time better, manage your stress better. If you're, for example, anxious, then it's about caring less, doing more meditation, doing breath work. They will treat the symptom like the project, like the problem that needs to be solved. And it's all just about better balance, better maintenance, being able to keep all the balls up in the air better. I'm here to tell you that that is a lie. I've spent about the last 20 years looking at the intersection between the human mind and the structures that we're forced to inhabit. So those could be gender roles, for example. But it's really about the pressures that we face in order to try to control our lives. My background is clinical. I have a master's in psychological medicine and a degree in psychology. But my work today is really about more of a kind of architecture. So what I'm saying is that when you feel stuck, I'm not going to look for what's wrong with you. Okay, for starters, that's the main thing. What I'm going to do is look at your situation and everything that you're trying to manage and navigate and unpack it from there, because that's where it has to start. That's what we have to look at together. So this is the first episode of the Blueprint Sessions, and today we're talking about what I've decided to call the year of the reveal. So this was 2025, last year. This was how I sort of had a bit of an awakening. Brené Brown talks about her sort of epiphany moment as being a breakdown / epiphany sort of moment. And for me, that really happened in 2025. So I'm going to go through how I lost my original blueprint, how I really sort of discovered the control delusion, and why your current coping strategies might actually be the mechanisms that are keeping you trapped. So if any of that interests you, then you've come to the right place. So let's start with my own personal story, a little bit of background. 2024, so towards the end of 2024, I hit a wall. Right, but it wasn't a kind of sudden crash. It was very slow and a kind of structural collapse. So the year before, I had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And a few weeks after my surgery, my consultant looked at me and said, look, your prognosis is good, but the most important thing for you to do right now is to cut out stress. So I took that on board. I found that to be a really important wake-up call. I thought, okay, this is the information that I need to move forward. I thought I could manage the stress. I thought that if I meditated more frequently, if I exercised more, if I ate right, I could control the outcome. But you see, life doesn't really work like that. And 4 months later, my mum passed away. And 12 months after that, almost to the day, I hit burnout. And that wasn't an accident. My mind and body weren't buying my management strategies anymore. It just wasn't happening. They were mechanisms that I was using to kind of keep the symptoms of stress at bay, but it obviously wasn't solving anything. I was dealing with grief, loss, and trauma, and my response was, I've got this. I'll just wake up earlier, I will just do all the things, I will follow the steps, and I can keep burnout at bay, which was really my kind of number one objective. And I'd really love to know if that sounds familiar to anybody else, because I think it's a real tendency that we have. When things are uncertain, when we feel that our world is falling apart, we can end up doubling down on the things that we feel that we have control over. In the clinical world, we talk about the allostatic load. Now, that is the total amount of stuff on your plate. In simple terms, it's your job, your caring work, your unpaid labour, your trauma that you're carrying around with you. And if that load becomes too heavy, it doesn't matter how resilient you are. It doesn't matter how much you work out. It doesn't matter what people think of you. As my son would say, you're cooked. You don't need a meditation app. You don't need anything new. You don't need to kind of take a class. You need a new blueprint. You need a new plan. And that doesn't mean it's something complicated or involved. It means really kind of doing a bit of an audit of what's going on for you. What is your allostatic load? What are you dealing with? Because it's only after you've hit the wall that you realise what you were doing to yourself. And the idea that you can control that by doing more is not just unhelpful, it's seriously damaging to your health. So this brings us to the core of today's session, which is all about the control delusion. I couldn't drive my kids to school. I couldn't function properly. I felt that my whole reality was distorted. But I was still writing reports and running payroll through work. I wasn't taking enough time because I had made myself irreplaceable. And I'd done that because I thought that by holding everything together, that I was in control. But the reality was everything was dependent on me. I had to fix everything. I had to solve everything. And what that meant was that I was always the kind of the support holding everything together. And if I wasn't there, it would fall apart. Now, for a lot of us, it's how true is that and how much of that is based on our own fears. In the end, it doesn't matter. If you believe that, that's enough to cause that level of pressure and to break. And it's very difficult to get clarity. It's very difficult to really understand what is the evidence of your beliefs, how you make sense of the world when you're coming back from that, and where do you turn? And Maya Angelou famously said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. And so the hardest part of recovery, my recovery, it wasn't necessarily the physical healing. It was the psychological reveal. And it was realizing that the people I thought were my pillars were actually just leaning on me. And when I stopped holding up the roof, they didn't step up, they left. But that was certainly my experience. And if it was yours, I'd love to hear from you. We think that if we are good enough or loyal enough, we can control how people treat us. We can't. Spoiler alert, we can't. That's all part of the control delusion. Accepting that you have zero control over other people is actually kind of terrifying. But it's true. And it's the only path that you can find towards your own power. And so the answer isn't to love less. It's to release the need to control the outcomes. When you stop trying to fix the unfixable behaviour of others, you reclaim the energy to fix your own foundation. You move from being a victim of the structure to being an architect of it. In my studio, I perform what I call blueprint audits. So I want to show you shifts from the past year of working with clients that illustrate exactly how we move from this sense of being in a sense of managing to architecting, to having that sense of power rather than being obsessed with the need to control. And I think this will sound familiar to a lot of women. She was working in a deeply toxic culture and she had to make a decision as to whether or not she would speak up and use her voice or stay silent and play safe. And she had the courage to speak up and use her voice. And that came with a huge amount of challenge and disruption to her life. But she was very clear in the knowledge that this was who she was. This was not something that was negotiable to her. And it was important to her to stick to her principles and to follow them through. That doesn't mean to say that it's easy. And that was a big part of the work that we did. It was understanding how to really connect with her own intuition. And I think that's a big part of the work that I do with clients overall. For women, we are conditioned to shut out emotion, especially inconvenient emotions. So when we speak up, when we speak our mind, when we say that our boundaries are crossed, we are told that we're irrational, that we're sensitive, that we're paranoid. And actually, what we were able to do together was to unpack that and to look at that in context, to understand the reality of it. And what we found was that she had found herself in a position where she was automatically dismissing her feelings, her emotional responses. She was blocking out her emotional responses, but also physical responses. And also having some trouble listening to her gut, her intuition, because of this external, but also sometimes internal monologue around, you're wrong, you're being too sensitive, you need to be quiet. And some of this would come from people externally, people who were afraid. And that's a lot to manage. But what we found was that when she was able to listen to what her mind, body and soul were trying to tell her. So I talk about that in terms of your physical sensations, your emotions. So that will be, how does rage show up for you? How does fear show up for you? All of those things. But also, what does your heart tell you? If you can really make sense of those things and listen to what your mind, your body, your heart is telling you, then you're able to connect with your intuition, and you're using your emotions as a way to navigate rather than something that you have to fight against all the time. And I want to mention this because this is a really important theme that I've had with virtually all my clients. It's this idea that when feelings are inconvenient, we must ignore them. We must deny them, especially rage. And what we have discovered through practice is that those emotions show up for a reason. I say that all the time in sessions. Emotions show up for a reason. If you are angry, somebody has likely crossed your boundaries. What were they? What happened? What can you learn from that? How can you protect them in the future? How can you advocate for yourself? These are the sorts of issues that are easily pushed down. And a lifetime of doing that results in serious health and well-being problems. And that's not just a kind of observation from my professional clinical background. There's growing evidence around how being separated from your own authenticity, it has serious implications for your mental and physical health. We'll talk more about that in another session. But it's really important to recognise that, and the importance of being able to listen to your intuition. If you feel tired, rest. If you're hungry, eat. If you're thirsty, drink. That sounds obvious, but do you know how many women will not eat when they're hungry because they feel guilty about it? I don't think I know any women who have never done that, have just spent their whole life doing what their body has told them to do. Why? Because we feel that if we do something that feels good, we'll be in trouble for it. So this is what we need to wake up to. This is an example of the kinds of issues that I'm seeing all the time, and how it's so important to be able to look at them in context and say, look, what's going on? What's the bigger picture? Because actually the things that you're talking about are completely understandable and natural, and you have a right to feel that way. What's the reason behind that? What's the context? What's going on for other people? It's structural. I'm working on a book at the moment all about the control delusion, which does a deep dive into the origins of kind of the most recent wave of patriarchy and why we're facing it. And the answers are all there. But it doesn't mean that that's reality, that that's what we have to accept, because it's not. So that was case one. I don't know if that resonates, but if it does, I'd love to hear from you. Case two was a client who came to me really with her first concern being about feeling disconnected from her faith, feeling that she was unsure. She felt that she was losing her faith. And we started with that, but also looked at the allostatic load. And I tend to do that almost with every client. So it's looking at what have you got on your plate? What are all the things that are going on? And there was so much. There was so much going on. There were also really high standards, levels of perfectionism that meant there was this kind of drive and need to do better all the time, to be a better person, be a better version of herself. This is also a very common theme that I've seen with other clients as well. And because of that drive, it means that it's very difficult to kind of get to the root of what do I need? What's important for me? And what we discovered was that the most important thing for her was to get some time and space for peace. There was so much happening that there was no time to rest. There was no time to make sense of all of the things that were happening during the day and being able to even kind of consolidate that later on. So it meant that it was all of the noise around the control. What are the things that need to be done every day that was stopping her from really understanding, well, what do you need to feel good now? And it was about having her own space, and whether that was finding a way to do that day to day, but also thinking about a longer term plan about how she could really solidify that and make that much more achievable, get her own place, rather than how do we manage it in a busy home environment, what can we do? So there's a lot around coming with one particular issue and then understanding that it's actually much wider than that. And there are very often expectations around what that means for you. So with a client coming to me talking about faith and feeling disconnected from it, it was also more about what was the relationship with her family's perception of faith. Was it so much about fitting into their expectations as it was rather how can she cultivate her own relationship with faith? And she realised that actually that was within her power. She had the power to decide on what that looked like. But because there was so much external noise around the expectations, it was really hard for her to just be able to get clarity on that. And she didn't have time and space to do that either. So she was able to really be able to think about what is the most important thing for me right now. And it was about finding that peace. It was also about creating a plan towards what are the main things she wanted to achieve over time. And that was something that we were able to do together as well. But really what it has meant has been an ability to cultivate a foundation. What I sort of relate it to is almost this feeling of a sense of being at home wherever you are. And I think that is something that is achievable for all of us, but we are so afraid of uncertainty. We're so afraid that if something doesn't go to plan or if something goes wrong, then our whole world will come crashing down. And I think the learning that I have from my personal experience and the coaching that I've done is that actually you can do everything 100% right and your world can still come crashing down. So instead of being focused on trying to control all of these things that are mostly out of our control, let's embrace the power that we have. Let's enjoy the relationships that we have, which are positive and life-affirming and loving and beautiful, and the parts of our lives that give us joy, and be able to lean into that, because that's the real message behind all of this for me. And that's been the big learning for me for 2025, has been that idea of what's important, how am I spending my time, and realizing that being obsessed with the things that we believe are so important to us, doing everything right at work, making sure that we're the perfect spouse or mother, or trying to fit the expectations of other people, is the most exhausting and pointless activity that you can spend your time doing, honestly. And I've learnt that the hard way, but I'm also finding that in practice. And that's where it's really helpful to bring these stories to you, because I hope that they will resonate and that they will make sense, and that you will think, well, maybe it's not just me. And I guarantee you it's not. It's really not, because that's the sort of conversation I have with clients all the time. And they're very often thinking, is it just me? Am I being oversensitive? Am I being emotional? Am I being unreasonable? I won't say absolutely not. But what I will tell you is, let's just look at what's going on, shall we? Shall we just look at all of the things that you're managing right now, and how you're stretched, and how you've had to deal with trauma, how you've had to deal with discrimination, how you've had to deal with, I mean, also in the last 12 months, the world literally feeling like it could end at any moment. Can we talk about that? I mean, that is a really important one. But that brings me back to the point that I'm making around how, whether it's at a global level or whether it's at a personal level, these are the same structures that we face, and they're manifested in terms of relationships. It's the interactions that we have with different people. It's the interactions that we have on a personal level, but it's also the interactions that we see of the people that are making the decisions about our lives and how our lives should be run and how our rights are affected. That's what we need to be aware of. That's the point around having a bit more curiosity and looking a bit more deeply. Because when you realise how much of this is structural, then you can understand how you're not alone. Because this is how things are designed. They're designed this way, actually, especially for women, to keep you small, because these systems were not built for us. They absolutely weren't. And if you're also black or brown, or you have a disability, or where you were born is different from where you live in terms of the country, then you have a huge problem. So this is what we need to recognise, the wider picture. And what I want to come back to on this is recognising that with these cases that we've talked about, there's and other clients I've worked with too, there has been a huge theme around these kinds of worries, anxieties, feelings of guilt and shame. And I find it resonates, but I find it so disheartening, because these are the women that are really showing up. They're the women who are showing up for their communities. They're standing up for what's right. They're using their voices. They are courageous. They are holding everything up. They are doing all these things. They're the ones who work in the non-profit sectors or areas like teaching or community work or social work. And they're worried that they're not doing enough. They're worried that they are being irrational and unreasonable. And my message is, let's look at what's going on, because it's really not that simple. And actually, these women are doing above and beyond. And that's why it's important to get that level of external view on the reality. Let's just reality check this. Let's just see what's going on here. Because if I can tell you a million times you're doing more than enough, that's not going to make a difference. If we actually look at that, if we actually unpack it, then you can say, yes, this makes sense. Perhaps this is too much. I just want to kind of wrap up with another Maya Angelou quote. Because as well as talking about how, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time, she also said that she's had rainbows in her clouds. I mean, she's one of my rainbows, along with a whole other list of inspirational women that I talk about in practice, that I refer to, that I read, that I follow. But when I stopped trying to hold everything up and I got really honest about how I felt about the relationships in my life, I had space to see the people who were the rainbows in my clouds, the work colleagues who were actually really close friends, the neighbour who would offer me a coffee when I was feeling at my lowest, my oldest friend from school who would send me a text message just to check in and see how I was doing. You know, that's what is revealed to you when you strip away the structure that you think you need. When you let it collapse and you let it drop away, you will see the rainbows in your clouds, and they are worth looking for. But also, you will more than likely be the rainbow in somebody else's cloud. And however other people respond to that, that is true. That's not something that can be taken away from you. By clearing the site, you can really kind of prepare the foundation. And that's what we're talking about. It's being able to find that sense of groundedness. It's feeling like you have that feeling of home wherever you go. It's a quiet confidence. It's a calmness. It's something that can be knocked around, definitely. And I would also say that there can be a very unhelpful way of expecting that people can just sort of manifest joy and happiness all the time, because that's another sort of pressure. It's understandable that you feel crap sometimes. That's just the way it goes. But if you know that you have a sense of support within yourself, if you've been able to cultivate that yourself and you believe it and you have the evidence, that's all you need to be able to navigate what comes next. Also important to have some level of support network. But what I would say is you don't need to be so attached to what you think that should look like. Trust in the people who will step up when everything falls apart. So, for those of you who might be ready to make a change or to kind of start your own renovation project, shall we call it? My 2026 tiers are now open. And so they're kind of different levels of support if you feel that you would like to take this kind of conversation further. Tier 1 is to join our weekly briefings for a sort of structural clarity. This is something very different to what the self-help industry might give you. This is more about giving you the tools, education, community, but also direct line to the conversations that really help to unpack and reveal the power structures that are impacting your life. So that's a great one just to get involved with and to really make use of some of the training and the videos that are there. I've done a whole suite of stuff over the last 12 months, which you get for free when you join the membership, which is worth quite a bit. And so you get that for a monthly fee of £49 a month. And you just kind of are pretty set then, because you also get the new training and tools as they come up as part of that. Plus you get the newsletter and you also get this podcast emailed to your inbox. So there's a lot there that will help you to kind of get clarity, but also tailor towards what you want to get out of this and how you want to make progress. Tier 2 is really like a monthly support, so you can have a monthly session with me, plus the membership and everything that goes with that. And that really follows the same sort of process of the kind of audit process that we talked about today, and then really looking at unpacking that, understanding what's going on, the structural pressures, and then what you want to do and how you want to move forward. And then tier 3 is weekly. So that's the main difference. So it goes to a deeper level. It's more like, sort of call it a sort of full weekly architecture plan. So this is where we really kind of go into a lot more depth, and it's the most effective way of making progress. Having worked with clients, different frequencies and different sorts of structures, this really is the most effective one. Being able to show up each week, the same time, being able to kind of bring whatever you want to it and have that sort of knowing that you've got that and that there's consistency is really kind of, that's fundamental to being able to make good progress. You can by all means do it monthly, but it's not as involved It's a much lighter touch if you do it monthly, which is totally fine. But this is the one which is kind of the most sought after. And so I've got 6 slots for the weekly architecture plan. And it's really done on a kind of basis of, are we a good fit? So not everybody can kind of get the weekly plan, but it's a really good one to be able to kind of start you on a path to the life that you want and deserve. It's kind of what I've been through and how I found a way through. And I found that weekly support for me has really helped in that process. So anyway, that's available as well. The link is in the show notes. I'm Catherine Skinner. The architecture starts now. And if you want to learn more, then you can always follow me on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok. All of the info is in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined. Artlist.io.